Welcome to the Binge Breakers podcast. I'm Jacqueline. I am here to teach you how I overcame bulimia and my binge eating disorder, and how you can too. Through simple steps of mind management, repairing your relationship with yourself, understanding your habits, and intuitive eating. Hi guys, so I am here with a very special guest. She's been very kind to agree to be on here. I'm not going to say her name because it's anonymous, but this person is a client of mine and she is recovered from bulimia and she's doing great, fantastic, but she still has normal issues, of course. But she's agreed to be on the podcast. So I'd like to welcome her. Hello, so-and-so. I can't say your name. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so I guess we'll just take it away. We were both talking about it beforehand. We're both like slightly nervous. I'm nervous because this is my first client interview on a podcast, and I don't know, just you're nervous for normal reasons too.
Yeah.
But just tell us a bit about your story. So let's go all the way back. Tell us a bit about your story with bulimia. Like, how did it all start? Just give us the full rundown.
Okay, so my bulimia didn't start until I was 14. I'm now 28, so 14 years ago. But I think my issues with food started a lot earlier. So I'd say probably from the age of 6 onwards, I had an unhealthy relationship with food. I think it started, I gained some weight around that age, around the age of 6. I was probably overweight if you went by BMI, and my family, a few members of my family would make comments, um, things like giving my sister 2 biscuits and me 1, and food being restricted around me, and just comments, really things like I needed to watch what I was eating. So as a 6-year-old, although I wasn't really introduced into diet culture, there was this association that being overweight was not a good thing. And I think my dad left when I was a bit younger. I think I was 4 when my dad left, and conversations with my mum, she said before that time I was outgoing, I was, would talk to anybody. But after my dad left, it was around the time I started school. So going into school, all of a sudden I became shy, um, a bit reserved, found it a bit difficult to make friends straight away. So I think from a very early age, I also became a people pleaser. So I had a very small group of friends, and I felt that was probably around the time where my issues with self-esteem started, just at 4 years old. And then a couple of years later, adding in the issues with being overweight as a child, putting those two things together. And then as I got a bit older, I think I must have been around 8 or 9, I discovered that I could make myself sick. And although I didn't use that as a way to lose weight, I was aware that I could do that from the age of 8. So it was, I would overeat, and sometimes it would just come up by itself, so I'd be sick without having to do anything. Um, and I think having that there, when I was introduced to diet culture, and when I was a young teenager, and peer pressure and that kind of thing, knowing that I could do that, I think made me predispositioned to fall into bulimia a bit easier than maybe for somebody else.
Did you know about bulimia when you started doing that, or?
I did. So actually, I knew about anorexia more. So I was 13 or 14, and I was on an active diet. So I was trying to lose weight because I was the biggest one out of my friendship group. I was shy. I felt ugly, actually, and I felt that being smaller would solve all my problems. I would be more confident, people would like me more, and everything would magically just be perfect. So I went on a diet when I think I was 12, actually. I'd skip lunch, I wouldn't eat lunch at school. But then through the restriction, um, I would end up binging. And initially I didn't purge, but I would have that immense guilt about doing that, and then I would restrict again. So that cycle was already in place at the age of 12. Um, and I used to go on the pro anorexia websites. I discovered them at, I think, yeah, maybe 13 years old. I discovered the pro anorexia websites, and that's kind of what I was aiming for, to lose as much weight as possible. And
Hmm.
that's sort of where the term bulimia became familiar to me, because there was mention of it on there. But it wasn't until I was 13, 14, and I binged in a big way. And then I don't know where the thought came from, but it was knowing that in the past I had made myself sick, and I just thought, oh, I can get rid of the food and there'll be no damage done to my diet. And it was surprisingly easy to do that. And although I felt guilty afterwards and I vowed I'd never do it again, it was only a couple of days later that, again, after restricting and eating, I think 500 calories a day of that, then I binged. And then that cycle um, quickly became um, something that I did all the time. And at that time, I wasn't really thinking about the health consequences. As a 14-year-old, you don't. I was thinking more of, this is the best thing ever. I can eat whatever I want, and then I can be sick,
Hmm.
and then that's done. And or I used to get faint. I think that's the only side effect I had at that point, was if I had restricted quite heavily and then I binged, and I guess the electrolyte imbalance made me faint. And but I was losing weight, so it was working, and I lost weight quite quickly. Um, so I think at the age of 14, I lost maybe about 3 stone. And then all of a sudden, people were giving me positive comments. So they were saying I looked good. Um, I was more confident, and it fit my narrative that being smaller was better, because I was getting that positive reinforcement from people, and my confidence was increasing. So I started to rely on this way of living, to stay confident, to stay what I thought was likable, being in a smaller body.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like a slippery slope, and then that's the only
Yeah.
thing that becomes valuable.
So I did that for a couple of years. I got away with it. Nobody knew I was doing it. I hadn't told anybody. Um, and it was when I was 16. So after 2 years of this, that my family had noticed I'd lost weight, of course, but I wasn't underweight. So it wasn't, they weren't really worried about me, I don't think. And I managed to hide it successfully until one day when I was 16, and my mum discovered that I was sick. Um, and she didn't know much about bulimia. She didn't really know anything about it at all. So she was very angry at me, and took me straight down to the doctors to tell them what I'd done. And they referred me on to a child psychologist. So I went, but I wasn't ready to speak to anybody about it. I just wanted to get on with it and carry on doing it. And I was really angry, actually, that somebody was forcing me to speak about it when I just really wasn't ready to at that time. Um,
Hmm.
so that, yeah, I was 16 when I did that, and I came away from that and just kind of said I was better, and I wasn't. I just got better at hiding it and finding other ways to um, carry on with the binging and purging without being caught. And it went to extreme lengths, actually, of being sick in bushes, into bags, and hiding it in the bin.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah, I
really
think we've all
quite,
been there.
yeah, it was bad, but it was the only way I could carry on doing it. And I was stuck in this cycle even at that young age. It was like I couldn't get out of it. Um, and I think it wasn't until I got my first relationship when I was 17 that I I was still bulimic, but I wasn't being sick every day. So there was a period of time for maybe a year or so where it was like maybe a few times a week, but then I gained weight through not, I was still overeating, but not purging. So I gained weight, and then I became unconfident again. So it was just reinforcing that whole being bigger, you're unconfident and you don't feel very good about yourself. Um, and it it kind of yo-yoed a bit. I think I ended up getting back being overweight, and then fell pregnant with my first son. So during pregnancy, I was able to stop completely purging, but I did massively overeat and I gained a lot of weight in that first pregnancy just from the sheer amount I was eating. Um, so I wasn't healthy in any way. Um, and when my son was born, that was in 2012, he he changed my life for the better, but I was still very overweight. I was hiding in the house. We didn't go out because of how I felt about myself. And I gained even more weight just from comfort eating at home. And um, it, I think maybe for the first couple of months I wasn't purging, but I was definitely binging. Um, and then I did one of the shake diets, very low calorie, restrictive, and I lost weight again very quickly. I think I lost 4 stone in about 4 months. Um,
Wow.
and again, I felt great. I felt like it was just reinforcing that thing again of the being smaller, you feel good. People like you. You're confident. Um, but it's not sustainable. So the bulimia quickly came back. Um, and then again, I was relying on the binging and purging to maintain a lower weight. Um, and it that carried on for a number of years. I separated from my son's dad and moved into a house on my own. So it was just me and my son at that time, and um, he would go to his dad's every weekend, and it was like I had nobody watching over me. I could do exactly what I wanted. I could buy what food I wanted. I could binge and nobody would know. I could be sick as many times as I wanted, and it got pretty bad actually. That I was doing it multiple times a day, binging and purging, and weight going down again. Um, and then I met my current partner at that time, um, that year actually. So 2013, I met him, and he moved in quite quickly. And I did another diet because I was adamant at this time I didn't want to be bulimic anymore. I'd kind of got to a place where I didn't want to carry on binging and purging. I wanted to sort it out, but I thought the way to do that was another diet. So I did another diet, lost some weight, felt good, but I just couldn't keep it off. So I just did not know how to eat properly, eat proper meals. Um, so it was all or nothing. It was either I was dieting or I was binging and purging.
Yeah, it just becomes
Um,
this extremes.
Exactly. And I went back to bulimia again and I had to hide it from him because he, at that time, he had no idea that I'd ever suffered with an eating disorder at all. So I had to go to great lengths again to hide it, and it was getting increasingly worse. And then in the end, my mum and my sister knew that I was struggling again. Just, I think they, by that point, it had been so many years that they just knew just by how I was withdrawn socially. I didn't want to see people. I was secretive. So they knew at that point that I was struggling, and um, told him, and that really helped because I all of a sudden had somebody else that I could speak to about it. And although he's never had any issues with food or anything like that, it it was nice to have that support there all the time if I needed to speak to him, and he could pick up as well if I was struggling just by my mood, I think. So it helped, but it didn't stop my behavior. So I carried on binging and purging. But with his awareness, it meant that I had to um, I had to go to even greater lengths to hide it. So this is I would drive out in my car. I would go to multiple fast food drive-throughs, and then I would purge in my car because that was the only way I could do it at that time.
Mm.
And I did that more and more frequently. I started purging at work, um, anywhere I could get away with it because it became harder to do it in the house when he was there, and obviously the children would get my eldest son was getting older, so it it was like a sheer desperation. It's like I couldn't stop this behavior, but it was harder to do it. And it just affected my entire life because it took out so many hours of my day trying to uphold like a normal life and have all my responsibilities, be a mum, be a partner, go to work, have relationships, friends, family, and have bulimia. Um,
Yeah,
so I'd
bulimia
off,
is like a whole nother partner to take care of.
yeah,
It's a whole nother life.
exactly, yeah. So it wasn't sustainable, and that I just broke down one day, and I just said I just can't do this anymore. So I went back and had some counselling, which helped a little bit initially. Um, and there were weeks where I'd go without purging, and it felt good, but it felt like I was always, it felt really difficult to maintain this. It was like I had to put my all into recovery and the urges, fighting the urges to binge and purge, and it wasn't getting any better. Um, and eventually I went back to bulimia again. And this time I lost weight rapidly to the point that I actually became anorexic, through the amount that I was binging and purging. So it wasn't, although I was of anorexic weight, I wouldn't really relate to the behaviors of anorexia. So I wasn't restricting in that I wasn't eating. I was eating a lot, but I was just purging a lot too.
Hmm.
Um, so I think it was so bad that I was eating everything I was eating. I was purging every day. And that's when the physical side effects became really quite bad. So um, I was cold all the time. I would faint all the time. Um, I couldn't feel emotion at all. I was just a shell. I couldn't have conversations. I didn't look forward to anything. Um, I was just skin and bone, and I'd walk down the street and I'd get looks all the time from people. Um, and although I felt good in that I'd achieved something that I had previously strived to achieve, like I was a very low size, my weight was really low, I was still wasn't happy.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's also when I realized there's no amount of weight that I could lose and obtain this happiness that I'd been seeking. It just wasn't possible. And I knew I would die. And there was one time where I had just purged and I was very faint, and I had irregular heartbeat, and my heart was going. I could feel it, and I just genuinely thought that was it, that I was going to have a heart attack or something. And I just remember sitting there in my bedroom, writing down on my phone what I wanted for my son and what,
Wow.
it was awful because I hadn't got a will in place, but I just had this feeling that I didn't have very long left. That's how bad it was. Um, and that was sort of the turning point from being underweight for me, that I knew that I needed to gain weight if I wanted to live. Um, so again, I started eating more and I gained some weight, and that was really difficult for me because, um, like, as most people with an eating disorder, it's the fear of the weight gain, and that was a reality, and it was very, very difficult to accept. So I was still kind of controlling what I ate, so I'm to make sure that I didn't gain too much weight. Um, and then I ended
Yeah.
up sort of in a position where I was back to a healthy weight, but it was still being managed by bulimia.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, it's like it's just kind of it got a lot better, but it still
yeah,
wasn't quite there.
yeah, I wasn't in a dangerous place. I mean, when I was of an anorexic weight, that was when the doctors took me seriously. it was at the point where I was going to have to go inpatient if I didn't gain weight, and I didn't want that for my son. I wanted my life, so I knew that I had to do that. Um, and it's a shame that that wasn't enough at that time for me to then fully recover. But I think I still hadn't let go of this idea of perfectionism and of of valuing myself by my weight. So that was
Yeah.
still there, and I think that's what kept me trapped. And although I wasn't on death's door, I was still bulimic. And that continued for another until this year really, where I was sort of wanting to recover, but at the same time constantly going back to bulimia. And it was exhausting because I had another child by this point. So I had another son in 2018. So trying to be a mum to two boys, work, be a partner, do all these things, and have bulimia. Again, I was constantly overwhelmed, constantly burnt out. And then at the same time, using food to cope with these emotions. It was just a vicious circle all the time. And it just, this year, it got to the point where I just knew I just couldn't do it anymore. Um, I wanted to live. I wanted my life, and I wanted a fulfilled life, not kind of a semi living state where I'm getting by, but I'm not happy. I don't look forward to anything. It's just trying to keep my head above water all the time. And I, this year, especially with what's happened, this year's taught us that anything can happen.
Hmm.
And I'd always believed up until this year that this is my life. I'm stuck with bulimia. There's no way I can recover. It's impossible. But with what's happened this year, and we've had to live a way that maybe before we thought we wasn't possible, that it started to make me think maybe I can change things, and I've got the power to do that. Um, and
Wow,
that's
that's a really amazing 2020 perspective. I love
yeah,
that.
yeah. So that's kind of what led me to take recovery more seriously and approach it from a different way, because I've tried to recover in the past and I've always aimed for some kind of perfect recovery. So any setback would just send me right back, and I'd say to myself, "Oh, I knew you couldn't do it and you'll never recover." And I was really mean to myself all the time, and that, I think, didn't help me. Um, and I still very much
No.
valued my weight as my self-worth. So those two things, I think I had good intentions, but they kept me back where I was, because um, it it's impossible to be perfect. And that's what I was trying to do, is trying to have a perfect diet, a perfect day. And if I didn't, it was black or white. It was either a good day or a bad day. And um, I think the amount of guilt that I felt if I didn't have a good day was enough to lead me back to binging. So changing my perspective on that really, I think, was one of the main reasons why I was able to stop binging and purging and not go back to it. And I've not binged and purged now for um, I think nearly 3 months. And that's with no diet. I'm not dieting, I'm not restricting, I'm not doing anything at all other than just I'm not binging and purging. And it's easy now.
Hmm. Yeah, we were talking the other day, and it's kind of like you just wouldn't go back to that. It just doesn't
No,
seem like it's an option.
no.
Um, and I'd love to say, like, thank you for sharing all that. It's interesting for me because we've been coaching together for a while now, but we kind of just went in and focused on the present and
Yeah.
focused on the now. And I knew some of your history, but I didn't know a lot of that, and so which it's great to hear. And thank you for sharing that story. That's intense. And
Yeah.
I could say one thing: don't beat yourself up for that moment you had in like you were kind of felt like you were near death, right? And that wasn't
Hmm.
enough for you. I heard you say, and
Yeah.
I mean maybe it wasn't, but I just don't think you had all the right tools and all the
Hmm.
information, like you said. But I think you're right. It was a turning point for you. So just
Yeah.
don't If I could say one thing, don't look back at yourself and beat yourself up for that. It's just kind of you did the best you could with what you had.
Yeah, I
But
think I just feel sad for that time of my life.
uh,
It was just pure desperation, and um it was it's sad how quick that I got to that place as well, from just only a few months between kind of sustaining life with bulimia to being anorexic, having heart palpitations all the time and constantly wondering whether you'll wake up the next day. It's scary. So
mhm,
yeah, I guess I'm proud that I pulled myself out of that, even if I wasn't able to go the full way. If I hadn't have done what I did then there's no way that I would be talking right now.
mhm. Well, and you kind of answered some of the questions I had in mind. Kind of, it seems like you really went over what part of life did bulimia impact the most, and I'd
Yeah,
say just from you talking, it's kind of like your relationships, you're not, and I think the biggest thing probably was your lack of enjoyment for life, right?
yeah.
It's just like you said, living a shell life. But I would love to hear then. I kind of, I guess we know why you decided to recover, just like you
Mm.
can't do this anymore. But um, what led you here? Like, how did you find me? I guess I should ask. And why
Yeah.
did you decide to do that?
So for a while, I've used social media, it's Instagram, to I just look at quotes and follow accounts that were on the recovery journey, and it led me to a podcast. So it wasn't your podcast initially; it was another one, but it was similar, and it focused on habit. So about with not necessarily bulimia, but just with dieting and intuitive eating, that kind of thing, with building good habits. And then that's where I found your podcast. So I think it came up as a recommended based on what I'd searched. And I listened to the first episode, I think it was, and it just resonated with me completely. And it's like I from the months leading up to that, I had been sort of trying to recover, but again, just aiming for some kind of perfection and still not really letting go of that restrictive eating. So I had to have a plan. I was only eating foods that I felt I was safe to eat.
Mm-hmm.
I still had a lot of rules with food. And I think it was when I started listening to your podcast that I sort of realized that that's what's been holding me back, is that I'm still living by so many rules, restrictive eating, dieting, and not being more compassionate towards myself, and trying to address those things. It it just changed my perspective on and how I should approach recovery. It's completely different to anything I've ever read before. I've read all the other books, and they may have had an impact for a week or two, but I think I've mentioned to you before, it's when that motivation wears off, which is what I was worried about when I started the coaching, was that
Mm-hmm.
I'd get a few weeks in and the motivation would go, and then I'd go back to it, or it'd suddenly become really difficult. Um, but it didn't, and I could say 100% now that won't be the case, because the way I think about it is completely different to how I've thought about it ever in the past. Um, and the difference now is that I take accountability for my choices. And before, I feel like I always played victim. I would sometimes even use it as an excuse to not do things, or to kind of wallow in it. Um, but being accountable and reminding myself that nobody at any point in my whole eating disorder history has made me binge and purge. I've made that decision every single time. There's nobody that stood over me and said, you've got to do that. And taking responsibility for it, and knowing that I have a choice always, even if I've binged 5 times that day, I can still choose to not do it again. And it
Mm-hmm.
just kind of went against everything that I've always believed. So I've always had all or nothing mindset, where if I binged once, that was the whole day ruined. I might as well just carry on and start again tomorrow. And it's the same with dieting. It's like if you go away from your dieting rules, it's like, oh, I've done it now. I'll just carry on and start again on Monday, or when it seems like it would be more convenient to start again. And just challenging those thoughts and trying something different, it's just been completely life changing. And I'm I'm so grateful for finding the podcast and taking the time to challenge my own beliefs and thoughts, um, has, I believe, been the main factor of what's led me to full recovery.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that you said the accountability piece of that, because people take that and they think that holding themselves accountable means they should kind of beat themselves up over it, but it's different. You took responsibility for your actions and realizing you have a choice, and I think that's so empowering and
Yeah.
such a key piece that people are missing, is that you always have a choice.
Hmm.
And then you said it before and just now too, the perfectionism piece. It's like once you have had more compassion for yourself, even if you messed up and it wasn't perfect, you knew that you weren't going to treat yourself like trash
Yeah.
afterwards, and you knew that it's okay. Like you can pick it back up.
Yeah, that's it. And I think it was uncomfortable at first because it's just completely alien, not something that comes naturally to me to be nice to myself. But as time's gone on, it's got easier. And then combined with the actual habit of binging and purging, it's now effortless. Like it doesn't even come into my brain at all. Um, to if I do something that would have previously been against my rules, like, I don't know, eat more chocolate than I should have eaten, or I ate slightly past fullness, I don't then automatically think, okay, just go back in the kitchen and carry on eating and then start again tomorrow. Whereas that would be exactly what I would have done every time before. Um, so it's a time thing as well. So initially it's uncomfortable, and it 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 takes some time to it to become more natural. And I'm now at a point where it is, and I never thought I'd be at that point.
That's amazing. And then I think for the habit and bulimia, that was the first piece we covered. But
Yeah.
then afterwards, I think it was the struggle of like being uncomfortable with your body changing a little bit, and like
Mhm.
intuitive eating and that kind of stuff. Can you tell us how you dealt with that?
So I knew that I would probably gain some weight, and I accepted that. And although it was uncomfortable, I won't lie and say that it's been easy. It has been hard, but I just stepped away from the scales. I've worn comfortable clothes, and I I always had in my head that weight gain just wouldn't stop. If I allowed myself to eat what I wanted when I wanted, following loosely intuitive eating, that I would just continue gaining weight and it wouldn't stop. And that was a fear that always held me back. But the reality is that they did stop. And the first few weeks, it felt like a lot, and it was difficult,
Hmm.
but it didn't make me want to go back to binging and purging, because I knew that if I did that, I would just end up at this point again in a month or two's time when I decide I want to try recovery again. It's always the same. Um, and it it I think the majority of it was my body, um, not knowing what to do with the food, and not knowing when I was going to what I was going to do next, whether I was going to binge or deprive it again. So I think I just held on to a lot of food, and I was also eating things that I'd avoided eating for so many years,
Hmm.
that naturally my body didn't know how to process them. And just knowing that and being more compassionate about that, rather than just seeing the weight gain as a negative thing, um, allowed me to accept it more. And I knew it was worth it. And although I had in my head that it might not stop, and I could be in a position where I carried on gaining and gaining and gaining. Sticking that out allowed me to see that that wasn't reality, and it did slow down and stop. And although I don't weigh myself, I just feel I feel it in my clothes. I've not had to go up dress sizes or anything like that. And I think if I had to have done that, then I was also prepared for that. So um, it's I think there's still a loose tie there between seeing weight gain as a negative thing, but I'm definitely nicer to myself about it, and I'm still working on that, and it's getting better as time goes on. So I'm hopeful that a few months or next year, however long it takes, that will only um, get better.
Yeah, the more and more you work on that, the better it will get. But I love that you made that distinction in the very end there, that even if I had gained more weight than anticipated, I was prepared for it. And
Yeah,
we obviously would have talked about it too. But
yeah,
and the biggest thing that I think I've told you before and tell a lot of people is that, like, even if you gain weight, it's not permanent. Like, you can decide later on if you would like to lose weight or not. But
yeah,
I think the beauty that you found is loving yourself no matter what is above all else of the most importance for recovery.
yeah.
Mhm. That's amazing. Yeah, I you've come such a long way. And I remember those first few weeks and kind of the weight gain, and like you not necessarily being convinced that it was gonna stop.
hmm
And that was, but you stuck it through, and you should be really proud of that. That was a hard moment for sure.
Yeah, it was difficult. That there were days where I questioned, is this what I want to do? But it nothing would make me turn back to that. And weight doesn't define you, and you are a lot more than your weight. So just in the couple of months of being recovered, I'm more present with my children, with my partner. I laugh, I'm happy. Life isn't perfect, but I'm there for it, and I can feel it. And even though I don't numb out from the negative emotions, they don't feel as bad because I feel like I can handle them much more when I don't have bulimia on my shoulder as well as all my other responsibilities. So it it is so worth it. And even if I'd gained much more weight than what I have, it would still be worth it.
Mhm. Well, you said something interesting the other day about Christmas and the fact that, like, the plans had changed drastically because
hmm
of lockdowns, all that sort of stuff. And I thought it was so great that you said I felt kind of angry and upset about it, but
Yeah,
food wasn't really what I turned to. I just kind of felt the emotion. I don't know if you use those exact words, but that's a sign to me that you're actually feeling the good and the bad, and that's
yeah,
amazing. It's You're actually able to handle it.
yeah. It didn't even come into my head at all to turn to food. Um, it I felt extreme upset and anger actually at the situation. Um, but there was not even a tiny thought of let's binge or um, let's eat to numb out from it. Um, so that is I've come such a long way, because that would have been I would have been in the cupboard straight away, before I even let the emotion build. So um, and another thing is that the emotions subside. So the next day I was perfectly fine again. So just riding out those negative emotions, because inevitably you will have times where you're stressed or upset, or angry, and you might get temporary relief from food. But when the emotions come back, which they always do, they're worse, because then you've got the added um, bulimia, I guess, the come down from having a binge and purge added into the equation. Um, whereas staying not doing that and just riding out the emotion, it just it feels so much better, and less extreme. Um, and
Mhm.
yeah, it's just I when I think about it, I just think I just can't believe that I don't, it just doesn't come into my head anymore. It's just, it's gone.
Yeah, it's because you're a different person.
Yeah.
like, like I always say, even if you did, let's say, struggle with bulimia again, like you would be a different person. You'd handle it completely different with people, which is something
Yeah.
I talk a lot of because fear of relapse is a real thing. Um, and thinking about it from the sense of like, okay, even if you did, which I don't think is likely, like you'd still be able to handle it in a completely different way. You'd pick yourself back up in a
Yeah.
different way and be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I think the self-compassion that I've learned, and I'm taking much more time to be aware of that, and be kinder to myself. I think if there was a time where bulimia came back into my life, then that I would it would be much easier to get back out of it because of that, having that skill, um, and and just being kinder to myself be it would just make things easier to um, not feel so guilty and dragged down and kind of trapped again, because the choice is always there to change.
Hmm. Yeah, you've really taken away the power from bulimia, I think is the
Yeah,
big thing. Like it doesn't seem, I think before when you fall into bulimia, you think it's this uncontrollable thing. And now if you were to fall into bulimia again, you know what it really is. It's like the Wizard of Oz. You know,
yeah.
he's behind the green curtain. You think he's like this crazy powerful thing, and then you realize it's just like a man, like pulling the strings, and
Yeah,
you can easily say no.
yeah, that's it. And that's the biggest part of as to why it's been effortless. Uh, the easiest part for me has not been binging and purging, which is the bit that I struggled for 14 years every day. That's been the easiest part, because changing the way I think about bulimia and my eating disorder has been enough to stop me from doing it. Just knowing that I have that control and I have choice, regardless of whatever happens in life, no matter how much stress I'm faced with, um, I don't have to choose bulimia.
Oh my gosh, I'm smiling right now. I feel so happy. I'm really happy for you. That's amazing. And I know we feel like we could talk for a long time, but I would love for you to just say like we've covered it a lot, so maybe you'll just
Yeah.
repeat something you said. But what advice would you give to someone struggling with bulimia right now, who's maybe in that place of like not even believing that they can recover?
I think I would just say you can recover. I was bulimic for 14 years, and most of that I spent binging and purging multiple times a day. And I believe for many years that full recovery wasn't possible. And it is. It really is. And you have the choice to change your life. You can do it now, right
Mm.
now. You can stop. And it doesn't matter how bad it is or what else is going on in your life. You can choose to never binge and purge again. Um, it's uncomfortable, and you may have setbacks, and that's okay. Nothing's perfect. You'll never be perfect. And I can tell you that life without bulimia is so worth it, and is not perfect. And I still have stress and arguments and things that happen in life that were still there before when I was bulimic, but the way I deal with it is completely different now. And I I can tell you, hand on my heart, that life without bulimia is the best thing you will ever do.
Oh, that's amazing. I love the hand on my heart. Like I can tell you
Yeah,
that's
it's
yeah.
no, I feel so strongly about it because I, for so many years, I just felt trapped and stuck and nobody understood, and that was it, my life forever, and there was no way I was getting better. I felt like I tried everything. It was hopeless, but it was just the way that I was approaching it was what was holding me back. And dieting is what I think started my bulimia, the restricted being restrictive, and letting go of that is a key element, even if it's scary. It's a key element to getting better, because restriction, the deprivation, eventually, for me anyway, always led back to binging, um, and just that horrible cycle. So letting go of that is really hard, but it's one of the key things for me that enabled me to really recover. Um,
Yeah, and I think you were able to let go of that a little bit because you realize there's more to life, to put it simply.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
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 because it's finding your value that isn't in weight, and like you can lose weight if you want to, but you first have to love you for you, which
yeah.
obviously is everyone's journey. Like I still struggle with that sometimes myself, so it's up and down. But well, thank you for sharing all that. That was fantastic. I'm sure everyone listening really appreciated your vulnerability and going back to that place. I know that you're strong and you can handle it, and
Mhm.
you're a different person now. But I'm sure that was difficult a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you.
hmm I keep wanting, guys. It's really hard for me not to call this person by her name. I keep wanting to say it. But thank you so and so for being on the podcast.
No, thank you
Um,
for having me.
yeah. Oh my goodness, wasn't that awesome? I was just listening to this because I was editing it a bit, and I don't know, it just kind of brought some tears to my eyes. It was really amazing to hear this person's story again and everything that she's gone through, and the fact that she has made such a difference in her life. And I don't know, it's amazing. So I just wanted to wrap that up and thank her again on this podcast for being on the show. I'm just so brave and so strong. And I hope that this has helped you guys realize that you have the potential to recover too. You're not alone. You're not crazy. Um, she recovered. I recovered. You can recover from bulimia. And whoever you seek out for help, I encourage you to just get the ball rolling. Of course, come get coaching from me if you want coaching from me. I'd love to work with you. You can do that on my website. But just take one action item today that you think would help you get closer to recovery, whether that's reaching out for someone for help or it's something else. But I promise you to just maybe start believing that you can recover. That will take you really far. Okay, I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye.
Hey, if you like this episode, you have to come check out the Binge Breakers Recovery course. If you're trying to recover from bulimia and you're sick of doing it alone and you feel like you've tried a lot of traditional therapies and it's not working with you, come join the course. Go to bingebreakers.com/recovery-course.